What if I told you that for 3 decades, the king of late-night television kept a secret? Night after night, Johnny Carson sat behind that iconic desk, inviting over 22,000 guests into America's living room. They came from every corner of entertainment: movie stars, comedians, politicians, even the occasional daredevil or animal trainer. But while millions of viewers thought they were just watching another Tonight Show interview, Carson was quietly keeping score. Behind the quick wit and legendary timing, there was a man who rarely let anyone past the walls he had built around his private life. Yet, every so often, a guest would slip past the defenses. Not just to perform, not just to plug a movie, but to connect with Johnny himself, the real Johnny, the one who existed when the camera stopped rolling. A former producer put it best: Johnny was always in control. But there were a few guests who could make him forget the cameras were there. When they showed up, he wasn't just hosting a show, he was having fun. And that's where our story begins, with a secret short list Carson never shared publicly, the rare few who earned not only his professional admiration but his personal affection. These were the people who made Johnny laugh until his sides ached, who made him tear up in front of millions, who reminded him why he fell in love with television in the first place. But to truly understand the list, and the number one guest who made Carson drop his guard in the most emotional moment of his career, we have to start at the top. With a Hollywood legend whose words made Johnny Carson do something no one expected: cry on live television. Television audiences had seen Johnny Carson deliver jokes that brought entire theaters to tears of laughter. They had seen him spar with comedians, charm movie stars, and even weather moments of chaos with unshakable grace. But one night in 1981, America saw something they had never seen before: Johnny Carson crying. The man who caused it wasn't a comedian trying to break him. It wasn't a scandal or a tragedy unfolding live. It was Jimmy Stewart, Hollywood's quiet hero, reading a simple poem about his dog. Jimmy Stewart was not just another guest to Johnny Carson. He was everything Johnny admired about Hollywood. Humble, authentic, unpretentious. Jimmy was everything America wanted to believe about itself, Carson once confided to a friend. Decent, real, kind. When Stewart came on The Tonight Show, the atmosphere shifted. Carson wasn't the witty host trying to control the room, he was a fan, a friend, a man at ease. And then came the moment. Stewart, with his famously gentle, halting voice, began to read his poem Beau, a tribute to the golden retriever he had lost. The verses were simple, honest, and devastatingly heartfelt. The studio grew silent. Carson's famous smirk faded. His eyes glistened. By the end, tears welled, and for once, he didn't hide them. A camera operator who was there later said, "I had never seen Johnny like that." He didn't make a joke, didn't try to cut the tension. He just let himself feel it. It was a human moment, not a TV moment. From that night forward, whenever Jimmy Stewart was booked, the staff knew Johnny would be in his best mood. He would even tell producers to extend Stewart's segment, a rare, almost unheard of honor. If Jimmy Stewart touched Johnny Carson's heart, Bob Newhart lit up his mind. When Newhart walked onto the Tonight Show stage, Johnny's trademark half-smile grew wider, because he knew he was about to share the desk with one of the only people alive who could match him beat for beat in comedic timing. Bob Newhart wasn't the type to come armed with a stack of rehearsed bits. He didn't need them. His genius was subtle, quiet, conversational, yet razor-sharp. He and Carson weren't just doing interviews, they were riffing, building a rhythm together that felt as natural as two jazz musicians improvising in perfect sync. A Tonight Show director who witnessed dozens of their appearances put it perfectly: Bob would start a story. Johnny would add just the right line at just the right moment. Bob would spin it further. It was like watching two pros toss a ball back and forth without ever dropping it. Carson respected that rare ability so much that he bent his own rules. Normally, Johnny was strict about timing, guests had their slot, then it was on to the next act. But when Bob Newhart was on a roll, Carson would signal the control room to hold the commercials, even bumping other guests if necessary. That almost never happened for anyone else. But what made Newhart special wasn't just the comedy. It was the man behind it. Despite his massive success as a stand-up star and sitcom legend, he arrived without an entourage, shook hands with the crew, and remembered camera operators by name even years later. To Johnny Carson, Bob Newhart wasn't just funny. He was effortless. He was genuine. And that combination made him one of the few guests who turned The Tonight Show into something more than television. It became a masterclass in comedy. If Bob Newhart was Carson's perfect comedy duet partner, Burt Reynolds was his partner in crime. Whenever Reynolds stepped onto The Tonight Show stage, the air changed. This wasn't just another polite celebrity chat, this was two mischievous schoolboys daring each other to go further. The audience could feel it. The crew could feel it. And Carson absolutely loved it. Burt gets the game. Most guests don't, Johnny reportedly told a producer after one unforgettable night. That game was simple, keep Johnny on his toes. And Burt played it better than anyone. While most stars arrived with carefully prepared talking points, Reynolds arrived with water pistols. Literally. The Tonight Show became their playground. In one legendary moment, in what was supposed to be a serious interview about Burt's new film, he suddenly smeared shaving cream on Johnny's face, live, on air. Rather than fuming, Carson held with laughter. The cameras caught him wiping his face, grinning like a kid who'd just been pranked by his best friend. Off camera, he laughed even harder. This was the kind of unpredictability he lived for, genuine surprise, not the fake oh well moments publicists staged for other stars. Burt also passed Carson's unspoken test, could you take a joke? Johnny teased him mercilessly about flop movies and public romances, and Burt laughed along, sometimes harder than the audience. That easygoing nature earned Carson's respect, and soon the two were trading shots like old drinking buddies. When producers prepped nervous guests, they often said, just relax and have fun, like Burt Reynolds does. That was the gold standard. For Johnny, Reynolds wasn't just a guest, he was a co-conspirator who made live television dangerous in the best way possible. When most people picture Johnny Carson, they see the grinning ringmaster of late-night TV, quick jokes, light banter, a carnival of celebrity gossip. But when Orson Welles sat down across from him, something remarkable happened. Johnny Carson became a student. Carson revered Welles not as a movie star but as a towering intellect, a man whose brilliance reached far beyond Hollywood. Johnny was never starstruck with Orson, a longtime producer once said. He was fascinated. Whenever Welles was scheduled to appear, Carson would quietly prepare in a way he almost never did for anyone else. He'd read history, brush up on theater, even study philosophy, not because he had to, but because he wanted to keep up. The conversations that followed weren't ordinary late-night fare. They wandered into art, politics, literature, and magic, yes, magic, one of Carson's lifelong passions. One unforgettable night, Welles performed a series of elaborate illusions live on air. Carson's reaction was priceless. The usually unflappable host sat wide-eyed, grinning like a boy at a carnival. During the commercial break, he leaned toward the camera and whispered to viewers at home, that was real magic, not TV magic. What Johnny admired most about Welles wasn't just his genius but his honesty. Welles would speak candidly about his failures, his projects that were cancelled, the times Hollywood turned its back on him. Carson respected that more than he could say. In a business full of people pretending everything was perfect, Orson Welles told the truth. Those conversations gave audiences a rare glimpse of the real Carson, the intellectual, the philosopher, the man behind the jokes. And for Johnny, those moments weren't just television. They were nourishment for the soul. If Orson Welles revealed Carson's intellectual side, Jack Benny revealed his heart as a performer. When Jack Benny visited The Tonight Show, Johnny's usual cool, confident demeanor softened into something rare, reverence. Here wasn't just a guest. Here was Johnny Carson's hero. Benny wasn't just another comedian to Johnny, he was the comedian. The man who had shaped Carson's entire comedic philosophy. He was the reason I do what I do, Carson once admitted. Watching Benny as a boy had been his masterclass in timing, the art of letting silence do the work, of letting a single raised eyebrow get a bigger laugh than any punchline ever could. So, when Benny walked onto that stage in the 1970s, Johnny wasn't just hosting. He was paying tribute. He would laugh a little harder, listen a little closer, even subtly change the set so Benny could have the best camera angles. Johnny would actually tell us, "Make sure you're on Jack, not me," a producer recalled. He wanted the spotlight exactly where it belonged. Their interactions felt like a generational passing of the torch, the old master, still razor-sharp in his 70s and 80s, sharing the stage with the man who had inherited his crown as king of comedy. For Carson, it wasn't about competition. It was about gratitude. In his office, Carson kept only one framed photograph of a celebrity, and it wasn't of Sinatra, or Dean Martin, or even Bob Hope. It was of Jack Benny. That picture said it all. When Benny appeared, The Tonight Show stopped being just entertainment. It became a living history lesson, a moment where Johnny could honor the man who taught him that sometimes the funniest thing in the world is just waiting a beat longer before you speak. When Carol Burnett stepped onto The Tonight Show stage, something changed in Johnny Carson. The shoulders that were usually tense from holding the weight of late-night television loosened. His grin widened. And for a little while, the famously private host simply looked happy. Carol wasn't just a guest, she was a force of nature who brought a kind of lightness that melted Johnny's usual protective shell. "Carol brings sunshine to the stage," Carson once told Ed McMahon, and the proof was in the way he treated her. With most guests, Johnny guided the conversation like a careful pilot. With Carol, he let go of the controls and just enjoyed the ride. Unlike other celebrities who stuck to carefully prepared talking points, Carol thrived on spontaneity. She would wander off script, toss in a game, turn the tables and start interviewing Johnny himself, and he loved every second of it. "Johnny trusted her completely," said a longtime producer. He knew she'd never embarrass him or the show. Whatever direction she took things, it was going to be gold. That trust was rare. Carson extended Carol's segments so often that producers learned to keep backup guests flexible, because if Carol was telling a great story, Johnny wasn't about to cut her off for a commercial. But it wasn't just her quick wit that made her special. Off camera, Carol treated the crew like family, remembering names, asking about their kids, thanking the staff. Johnny noticed that. He valued it. For Carson, Carol Burnett wasn't just entertainment. She was comfort. She was the rare guest who made The Tonight Show feel like two old friends sharing laughs in a living room, with millions of viewers invited to eavesdrop. When James Garner walked onto The Tonight Show stage, it didn't feel like a Hollywood star had arrived. It felt like a regular guy had just pulled up a chair. And that was exactly why Johnny Carson loved him. "James is what a movie star should be, and most aren't," Carson once said after a taping. Garner didn't perform for the cameras the way so many leading men did. He didn't stride in with a rehearsed anecdote or a polished image. He came as himself, no pretense, no entourage, no script. When he told stories about making The Great Escape or starring in Maverick, they weren't self-congratulatory tales about fame and fortune. They were about the real moments, the pranks between takes, the friendships with the crew, the fights and frustrations that made the work human. He talked about being a movie star the way most people talk about their office job, a Tonight Show writer once said. He made Hollywood feel normal. Carson respected that deeply. He hated phoniness, and he watched closely how guests treated the staff when the cameras weren't rolling. Garner passed that test every time. He greeted the crew by name, thanked the makeup artists, and chatted with the pages. He was approachable, grounded, and completely unpretentious. Johnny also enjoyed that Garner could bridge eras. He had stories about old Hollywood legends that captivated older viewers, but he also had a charm that made younger audiences lean in. Most telling of all, Johnny occasionally referenced private conversations with Garner on air, something he rarely did. It was his way of signaling that this wasn't just a guest. This was a friend. For Carson, James Garner wasn't just a star. He was proof that Hollywood could still produce the kind of man you'd actually want to have a beer with. When George Burns appeared on The Tonight Show, It felt less like an interview and more like a royal visit. Johnny Carson, the unshakable king of late night, would suddenly look like an eager student sitting at the feet of the master. Burns wasn't just a comedian. He was living history, a direct link to vaudeville, to the earliest days of comedy, to the roots of the very craft Carson had dedicated his life to. And Johnny revered him for it. Before every appearance, Carson would be just a little more nervous, not because he worried about the segment, but because he wanted to get it right. It was like watching a pianist prepare to play for Mozart, one producer said. That's how much Johnny respected him. What made Burns special was that, unlike so many aging stars who coasted on nostalgia, he kept getting better. In his 80s, 90s, even past 100, his timing was still flawless. His jokes were fresh, his delivery sharp. Carson once said, "Most of us peak and then hang on. George just keeps climbing." During interviews, Johnny often did something unheard of. He stepped back. Instead of guiding the conversation, he'd let Burns run with it, sometimes staying silent for minutes at a time while George delivered a story or a perfectly timed punchline. Carson knew greatness when he saw it, and he refused to interrupt. Even during commercial breaks, Johnny stayed engaged, peppering Burns with questions about the performers of the 1920s and 30s who had inspired him. For Carson, those moments were like secret masterclasses in comedy history. George Burns wasn't just a guest, he was a reminder of where comedy came from. And for Johnny Carson, that made every minute with him priceless. When Lucille Ball appeared on The Tonight Show, it wasn't just another late-night segment, it was a meeting of television royalty. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, and Lucy, the queen of the sitcom, shared the stage like two titans who understood the burden, and the magic, of carrying an entire industry on their shoulders. Carson rarely showed open admiration for his guests, but Lucy was the exception. "She's royalty," he once said during his 10th anniversary special, a rare moment where Johnny let the audience see how much someone meant to him. Their chemistry was electric, but not just because of comedy. Lucy represented something Johnny respected deeply, mastery of both the art and business of television. Long before it was common, she had built her own production empire, revolutionizing the way sitcoms were filmed and paving the way for generations of performers. Johnny admired that fiercely. Lucy wasn't just the funniest woman in TV, she was the smartest person in the business, a friend recalled Carson saying. On stage, Johnny often deferred to her, giving her the best camera angles and laughing with genuine delight at her jokes. And when she told a story that had the room howling, Carson would sometimes wave off the producer's signal to cut for commercial, letting her run long, an honor reserved for only his most cherished guests. One unforgettable night, Johnny surprised Lucy with footage from her very first screen test. For a moment, the ever-composed Ball teared up, and Johnny didn't rush past it. He let the audience see Lucy the person, not just Lucy the icon. For Carson, Lucille Ball wasn't just a guest, she was a peer, a pioneer, and a reminder that television could be more than entertainment. It could be legacy.